In this demo, we're going to take a look at the occupancy graphs on the dashboard. So at the completion of an activity analysis, the biggest question is always, how well utilized was this space? How occupied were the different spaces in this project? And so we can begin by looking at these two graphs in the upper left-hand corner. So you can see here that the overall occupancy for this space was 22%. Which is not a very high occupancy. So we can begin to dig in here and see this graph for hour by hour throughout the day. And you can see that for the majority of the day, it just hovers here right around 22.5%, with a bit of a dip around lunchtime, which is usually what we would expect to see. And then also a dip here, only 14% at 9 a.m. So perhaps in this organization they get started a bit later in the day. Now, if I want to begin, this is showing the occupancy, the average occupancy of all spaces that were observed. But if I want to dig in and perhaps begin to see this by the different room types, the different spaces, then I can do that. Now let's just go ahead and click on Assigned Desk. So for the assigned desks, this is showing more or less the same curve and the same average occupancy as we saw in the overall occupancy, which is to be expected in this project since the assigned desks were the majority of the spaces that were observed. So let's change this and look at assigned offices instead. And again, the average occupancy at its highest is more or less the same as the overall occupancy, with a bit more of a dip here at 9 a.m. But then here what's interesting is you can see a dip here in the afternoon of dipping down to only 19% at 3 o'clock and 17% at 4 o'clock. So this is showing that these private offices really are not very well utilized towards the end of the day, and this begins to suggest an opportunity for perhaps different ways that these offices could be addressed. Now we were just focusing upon workspaces, so perhaps let's take a look at some of the shared spaces. We have focus rooms here, showing a bit of a spike, quite a bit of a spike actually, here at 10 a.m., 58%. And so this begins to suggest that in the mornings, quite a few people are leaving their primary workspaces and going into these focus rooms in order to get either quiet work done or phone calls. This is something that when we look at activities, we could take a look at and try to understand what types of activities were happening in these focus rooms. Why were these focus rooms such a popular choice? But that's something that, again, I might take into an additional interview or a programming interview to begin to understand why it is that people are needing to step away from their desks and how these focus rooms are being used. Another spike here after lunchtime around 2 o'clock. We could take a look at one other space. Perhaps let's look at the meeting rooms instead. And the meeting room is also actually pretty well occupied. We have some maximum occupancies here of around 49% before lunch, 48% after lunch, and a bit of a follows the same general curve. But again, higher occupancies than what we were seeing in the workstations. So perhaps beginning to suggest that this organization is more collaborative, or that they have tasks that need to be done behind closed doors rather than in open workstations. Begins to bring up questions that we can look into later. Now, we can just quickly look at this occupancy by space type, and this is taking all of the different spaces that we were just examining on an hour-by-hour basis, but bringing their average occupancies together here. So you could quickly scan and see that pretty standard across, a bit of a dip in the computer training room, higher occupancy for the meeting room, which is what we just saw, and quite a bit of a dip here for open seating and open meeting room. So again, suggesting that perhaps these open spaces aren't performing very well within the space, or aren't being very highly utilized. Quite a bit of a spike here for the reception at 56%, but that might be expected if you have a receptionist or somebody sitting in the reception, or quite a bit of in and out traffic. So this concludes the demo on occupancy for the dashboard.